On April Fool's Day 2017, the world received the greatest trick of all time, the surprise release of the Season 3 premiere of Rick and Morty, The Rickshank Redemption. And it was glorious. We got a return to the Cronenberg world abandoned in Rick Potion number 9, the fruition of Rick's plan to overthrow the government and Jerry, the return of Bird Person, now Phoenix Person, and the introduction of Rick's series arc to obtain the Szechuan McNugget dipping sauce. And Season 3 as a whole has been chock full of references, secrets, and Easter eggs. And here are some of the best, starting with the premiere. Number 1. Jerry keeps a framed photo of his favorite Rick in the garage. In general, Ricks hate Jerrys, or at very least are disdainful of them. Jerrys are stupid, ignorant, and resentful of Ricks on the whole, and Ricks are mean-spirited, self-involved, and condescending to the extreme. They're just not well suited to one another. Except for Doofus Rick, the gentlest, kindest, and slowest of all Ricks. He and Jerry met and became fast friends and close Rick counters of the Rick kind, and both were outcasts from other Ricks, but found solace in their own friendship. And when Doofus Rick had to go, Jerry was left back where he had been before, disrespected and belittled by his Rick, generally ignored by his own family, and emasculated by life. Doofus Rick was Jerry's one true friend, and it's heartwarming to know Jerry keeps him close to his heart now. Number 2, 1998 Rick lived in Walter White's house from Breaking Bad. There's a lot different about 1998 Rick. He's got shorter hair, bluer pants, and a living wife. Also, he lives in a replica of Walter White's house from Breaking Bad, right down to the bush placement and the rock lawn out front. Well, maybe. Of course, the entire scenario shown here, Rick working in the garage and the method of him discovering the portal gun and the death of his wife and daughter, was a false memory created by Rick to trick Galactic Federation mind interrogator Cornelius Daniel.
We never left his Shoney's!
So while this whole thing might be made up in every way, there's also the possibility that the details of the day are made up. But the appearance of Rick, his wife Diane, and their home are all accurate. Of course, it's also possible and more likely that Rick had just been watching Breaking Bad recently and had it on the mind. Number 3. There's a Morty-Rick hybrid at the Citadel of Ricks. The Citadel of Ricks include every kind of Rick imaginable, from Lizard Rick to Black Rick to even Morty Rick, and a Rick that is either a genetic splice or a possibly grown-up version of former Morty. Maybe a bold Rick from another dimension decided hauling his Morty everywhere for protection was too cumbersome, so we spliced their genes together to save some effort, maybe? It might sound crazy, but then again this episode ended with a rant about the discontinued nugget dipping sauce from 1998, so anything's possible. Number 4. Another Morty is carrying around journal number 3 from Gravity Falls. Pretty much every scene on the Citadel of Ricks is chock full of little hidden gems and Easter eggs. And that same frame where we find Morty Rick, we also find another Morty holding onto what is clearly journal number 3 from Gravity Falls, the Journal of Gravity Falls lore written by Stanford Pines that contains information on all the supernatural creatures and going-ons in the series. Of course, this isn't the first time we've seen a Gravity Falls reference in Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty creator Justin Roiland is buds with the Gravity Falls creator Alex Hirsch. And it won't be the last, even in this same frame. Number 5, there's a Morty Mabel and a Morty Dipper at the Citadel of Ricks. Since there's every conceivable version of Rick at the Citadel of Ricks, there's also every conceivable version of Morty, including 2 Mortys that look suspiciously like the protagonists of Gravity Falls. Is their Rick a Grunkle Stan Rick? Maybe we'll find out in Season 9, when Rick finally gets that Szechuan sauce. Number 6, we get a real good look at Rick's dick. It's Tiny Dick! Number 7, Dan Harmon's end screen logo has changed to reflect his divorced life. Well, here's a less than fun Easter egg in the episode. Dan Harmon's end screen logo has gotten significantly more grim since October 2015, as he's gotten divorced and presumably more depressed in the meantime. His logo now has him laying on the couch, disheveled, grayer, and surrounded by garbage and liquor. Here was the previous end screen. Keep your head up, Dan. We, a bunch of strangers on the internet that you'll never meet, still love you. Moving past the premiere, Episode 7 is also overflowing with references. Number 8, tons of cameos and character references. You probably don't need to be told that the Rick with the long hair and the robes is supposed to be a nod to Severus Snape. Same goes for the storylines that contain aspects of movies like Stand By Me, Training Day, and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. But there were a few other neat references that you might have missed if you weren't rewatching this amazing episode 6 times already. It's kind of incredible it took this long at the creepy Morty Bar Club sex dungeon, but we finally got a version of Morty that's a dead ringer for Marty McFly. Die-hard fans will know that Rick and Morty started as a crude Back to the Future parody called Doc and Marty with an H in there for some reason. Thankfully, these days, the show is still a crude Back to the Future parody with, extra steps. Digging a little deeper, one of the Rick candidates on the debate stage should look familiar to those well-versed in the red-hot memes in 2010. There's no doubt about it that facial hair can only belong to Jimmy the Rent is Too Damn High McMillan. The animators went out of their way to replicate his tie too, which is a nice touch. This one's a little less obscure. Rick Sanchez is one of pop culture's most beloved genius assholes, so it makes plenty of sense that one of his many variations would resemble a real-life genius asshole. If you want to catch every reference in this show, you've got to be willing to pause and zoom. Otherwise, it's hard to catch this Doctor Who shout-out in a crowd shot near the beginning of the episode. The scarf and trench coat are classic Doctor Who standards, but the hat makes it look a bit like this was a specific reference to the 7th Doctor, played by Sylvester McCoy. Back at the creepy Morty, an even deeper cut is lounging in a booth. That's not Rick and Morty creator Justin Roiland, as many have suspected. That's actually Dan Guterman, one of the show's writers. This Morty, on the other hand, is a puzzler. As far as I can tell, no one has quite nailed down just who or what this lineless Morty is supposed to represent. Some have suggested he kind of resembles a South Park character, and others think that he looks more like Marty from the original show prototype. If you have any ideas, please let me know in the comments and berate me for my obvious oversights. Number 9, the return of Shoney's. The appearance of a Shoney's restaurant in the Season 3 premiere has inspired a ton of fan theories, mostly involving Rick still being in the same mind prison where he started the episode. The theories hinge on the idea that every reference to Shoney's reaffirms the idea that Rick is still in the imaginary Shoney's of his own making. So when the Shoney's mug shows up on the mid-management Rick's desk just before he gets blown away, supposedly that's yet another signal that the whole season so far has taken place in Prime Rick's mind. I'm not really on board with this concept, especially because Shoney's is an actual restaurant that exists. Even so, reinforcing the idea that Rick is a big fan of a mid-sized diner chain gives this character a charming new wrinkle. This is a smaller thing than some of the entries on this list, but all these little bits really add up to something special. Number 10, Morty's meaningful signage. Since they know the internet's going to dissect every frame of their show, the Rick and Morty team went ahead and made it worth the effort to pause and zoom during these dense scenes. When Cop Morty drives through a crowd, you could see a handwritten sign that says, "Nobody exists on purpose." This is a callback to a memorable moment in which Morty consoles his sister during a crisis.
Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's gonna die. Come watch TV.
During this speech, Morty mentions that he and Rick buried that particular dimension's Rick and Morty in the backyard after they messed up their own universe. The existence of the slogan makes you wonder if the other Rick and Mortys out there have had similar adventures and have similarly consoled Summer, meaning that they likely ruined Cronenberg realities themselves. It's a bit heavy, but not all the signs have such morbid implications. Second from the right, squint and you can see somebody holding up a sign that reads, "This guy needs a plumbus." Really though, who doesn't? Number 11, the bleak motivational poster in the classroom. Even from the time that we spend in the Morty-filled school, we get the idea that it's really more for the benefit of the Ricks than anyone else. The Mortys that come through the doors are all missing grandfathers for various reasons, and are likely only spending time there to keep sharp until another Rick needs a sidekick. The attitude that regards Mortys as a resource and not as human beings is encapsulated in the recycle sign at the back of the class, the one with a Morty face in the center. Something tells me that sign might be coming down after the regime change. Number 12, Beth's love of horses goes way back. The saga of Simple Rick might be the darkest part of a Pitch Black episode. We see that one of the only Ricks that decided to actually spend his time raising a child is not venerated for his deeds, but instead harvested for delicious-looking snacks. The brief flashbacks of good Rick's parenting are some of the only glimpses we have of that era, so it's worth taking a closer look. In this background, you can see Beth posing for a picture with a horse. This definitely lines up with her current line of work. It's somewhat heartening to see that Beth followed through with her dreams, even in a universe where she wasn't encouraged by a positive father figure. Then again, knowing the show, Beth probably became successful to spite Rick and to show that she doesn't need him around. Number 13, Cop Rick and Cop Morty seatbelt switcheroo. We've hit on this detail a couple times already, but it's so specific here that we have to mention it. The training day Rick and Morty cops flip the script not only on the relationship and personality of the two characters, but their safety habits as well. Note that Cop Morty isn't wearing a seatbelt while Cop Rick is strapped in. If you have not noticed, up until now, Morty almost always wears his seatbelt inside vehicles, while Rick basically never bothers. I'd ask if evil Morty wears a seatbelt when he drives, but I think we already know the answer. Number 14, somebody tagged Get Schwifty on the left side of this wall. There it is! That's it. There it is. Number 15, Evil Morty's diabolical plan. Everything came together at the end of this episode when that music kicked in and your jaw hit the floor. Even if you insist on telling everyone you saw it coming, it was still a fantastic capper to an excellent episode. But in straining to see the incriminating evidence just outside the airlock, you might have missed the fact that Trenchcoat Rick is among the fresh corpses. Remember, this is the same Rick that supplied the dirt about Evil Morty to Fired Morty in the first place. This hard evidence is the basis for a few emerging fan theories, the most convincing of which suggests that Evil Morty intentionally leaked the info about himself to Fired Morty, then killed him and Trenchcoat Rick to hide the evidence. Why do all of this? Well, Evil Morty needed the votes, and an attempted assassination could and did tip the scales. But how could evil Morty possibly guarantee that Fired Morty wouldn't succeed in his assassination attempt? Well, there is the fact that Fired Morty is still a Morty, but we also know that Fired Morty shot evil Morty with a gun in his left hand. Because Fired Morty used his offhand, he botched the murder. But wait, how do we know that Mortys are inherently right-handed? Well, Fat Morty did mention that he thought that he was left-handed Morty, implying that was supposedly the thing that set him apart from the rest of his kind.
I thought I was left-handed, Morty.
It seemed like a random joke at the time, but you never know what details could end up being important. For this theory to hold water, evil Morty would have to have had an intricate, meticulous plot in place. Sounds exactly like the kind of thing evil Morty would do, doesn't it? Almost makes you wonder if this was the plan all along. After all, it was during his first appearance that evil Morty killed scores of Ricks, using all of their Mortys to power a horrendous machine. Once all the Rickless Mortys were freed, they took refuge at the Citadel, where they helped create an unstable power balance that led to evil Morty's eventual re-election. But somehow listening to the evil Morty music again, remembering his past diabolical schemes, makes the theory a bit more believable. At this point, I'd be kinda mad if the conspiracy didn't turn out to be true. Moving on to stuff in episode 8. Number 16, tons of callbacks in the Alien Collector Zoo. If you're gonna look for Easter eggs in any piece of science fiction, the old alien who collects species in a zoo is about as reliable as it gets. It worked for Guardians of the Galaxy, and it works doubly well in Rick and Morty. The show has featured dozens of extraterrestrial species and other fantastic beings, so it only makes sense for a galactic curator to include some aliens in its interstellar menagerie. Right off the bat, there's a couple of Mr. Meeseeks, who can be seen for just a few frames while the collector passes Rick and Morty's cell. As no doubt you remember, Meeseeks aren't meant to exist more than a little while, so these poor guys must be in a lot of pain. Also visible for a brief moment are a few female Gazorpazorps, who Rick and Summer met on one of their adventures. Squint hard and you can see the Troutforkians off to the side in a wide shot. If you're wondering whether it's cool for you to call them Glipglops, you probably shouldn't. Like the Troutforkians, a lot of the collected aliens seem to have been present at Rick's party from the Season 1 finale. The alien collector doesn't really seem like the type that would be thrilled if one of their subjects got away, but at this point it would probably pay off to just follow Rick around and capture whoever or whatever he runs into. Number 17, Rick and Morty go to a real Mexican restaurant. It's not exactly Shoney's, but the Mexican restaurant featured in this episode is special for a different reason. Don Cuco is a real-life chain with a handful of locations in Southern California, and it appears, though, that the Don Cuco in this episode, where Rick dines with Zigzag the Flooplupian, is ripped straight from the Don Cuco in Burbank. Here it is on Google Street View for comparison. Fans speculate that since this location is near a few studios, including Cartoon Network, it may well have been visited by some of the crew. Seems like a good place as any for a last meal. Number 18, the Gravity Falls references are just getting out of control. Those who follow Rick and Morty closely, or those who've watched any of our previous videos about Rick and Morty, know that the show has a strangely close relationship with the beloved Gravity Falls. A couple Easter eggs in this season deepen that connection, starting with the very first scene. When Rick and Morty are running around the MC Escher-esque maze, they speed past a statue holding what looks to be an Illuminati eye, with eyelashes. Seems like a dead ringer for Bill Cipher, the dastardly villain from Gravity Falls. But hey, it could just be an unrelated Illuminati eye, right? Tons of TV shows and movies and American currency include that imagery. The probability of it being coincidence narrows a bit when you look closely at some of the memorable tube labels in Rick's lab. As Rick admits in dialogue, most of the labels are random gibberish. Pocket Poo on the left, but Bill C is undoubtedly a reference to Bill Cipher. In the same shot over to the right we see Stanford. And no, it's not a nod to the prestigious school with an uneven football team, it's this guy. That's Ford from Gravity Falls, otherwise known as Stanford Philbrick Pines. At this point, I think we'd all be shocked if we didn't get a Rick and Morty Gravity Falls crossover episode. Number 19, a quick nod to DC Comics' Sandman. This was obvious to plenty of folks who likely spotted it in the episode's preview, but we'll cover it just in case you're not familiar. The gaunt figure who chases after Rick and Morty in pursuit of the Truth Tortoise is a clear send-up of the DC Comics Vertigo character Sandman, specifically the version created by Neil Gaiman, Sam Keith, and Mike Dringenberg. Though you'd be forgiven if you got a David Bowie Labyrinth vibe from the Upside Down maze. Number 20, the Moon Man might have been real after all. The Moon Man memory that we see early in the episode sets the tone for a lot of these vignettes, in that it's an extremely messed up short story that ends with Morty traumatized. But there might be a bit more to the Moon Man than what we see. In the episode, Morty thinks that he sees a man on the moon through a telescope. Nobody believes him, and yet the Moon Man shows up in his school as a new guidance counselor. After some stalking and an accusation, the Moon Man apparently kills himself in his home. Afterwards, Morty double-checks his telescope and sees a Moon Man-shaped smudge, implying the entire incident was imagined and a man was driven to suicide for nothing. It seems kind of like a thing you'd want erased from your memory, too. We could take that at face value and it would completely fit the tone of the show, but there are a few details in the story that point to a more sinister undercurrent. The Moon Man was real the whole time. For instance, check out the license plate on the Moon Man's car. SATF-1V3 seems like a call out to Saturn V, the rockets that took the Apollo crew to the moon. Just after this, we see where the Moon Man lived, a house with a very special number. 237 is notably the number of the spooky haunted room with the old naked lady in The Shining. So that aligns with the Moon Man's creep factor at least. But this number is also important to conspiracy theory nuts who believe that The Shining director Stanley Kubrick helped fake the moon landing, including the room number as a nod at the distance from the Earth to the moon, which is approximately 237,000 miles away. Hey, and if we're getting into tinfoil hat territory, we might as well go all the way. Lastly, let's look at that offending smudge again and compare it to Morty's original sighting. Notice anything? When we first see him, Moon Man has a shadow, whereas that smudge kinda looks like Moon Man does not. We may never know what really happened here, but I think we could all agree on one thing. That unibrow is not to be trusted. Number 21, the Truth Tortoise's secret message. Rick and Morty's cold opens don't often have anything to do with the story as a whole, but rather offer a fun self-contained story that acts as an inciting incident that kicks off the plot proper. This episode was much the same, as we mentioned the titular duo attempting to escape a magical maze while carrying a truth tortoise. We don't know a lot about the tortoise other than you shouldn't look at it unless you want to know everything, and that it sounds funny, almost as if it's talking backwards. Because this is the internet, somebody has already reversed the truth tortoise noises and came up with this.
I'm a beetle, Paul is dead.
For clarity, that tortoise says, I am a beetle, Paul is dead. This is a send-up of the well-known Paul is dead hoax, a Beatles conspiracy theory that supposedly indicated that Paul McCartney had passed on and been replaced with another person. Some of the biggest evidence of the theory hinged on playing John Lennon's A Day in the Life in reverse, at which time you're supposed to hear Paul is dead, miss him, miss him. It's an older reference, but it still checks out. Number 22, why Summer got chewed out at the end of the episode. When both Rick and Morty are out of commission, who's left to save the day and set everything right? According to this episode, it's Summer, who wanders into the final minutes with a creamsicle in her hand. Though she restores her brother and grandfather's memories and stops their grim double suicide, in return, Summer is chastised by her own family. To see that, we have to look at the Scenario 4 instructions that Summer follows to do Rick and Morty's hard reset. Summer seems to follow every direction to the letter, with the exception of number 10. She doesn't leave the room. And so for all of her trouble, all she gets is a verbal beatdown. Rules are rules, Summer. Number 23, Jerry's VHS memories. Though Jerry hasn't been a huge part of this season overall because of his divorce with Beth, you can always count on him for a solid post-credit stinger. He came through huge this week with the E.T. parody Gobo, which was apparently part of Jerry's Mind Blowers. Instead of a huge room filled with multicolored memory vials, Rick only went so far as to throw together a glorified VCR helmet for Jerry. Looking closely at the box's contents and flipping the image upside down, we get an idea of what's on Jerry's other tapes. On the left, you can see a purple tape marked Sleepy Gary, who we all know is Jerry's secret lover that turned out to be a memory parasite. On the far right, we could see the Apples campaign, a reference to Jerry's pride and joy as a marketer. It's not clear whether the tape contains Jerry's memories of the time he was in a simulation and had great success with the Hungry for Apples campaign, or if the tape contains the time Jerry tried to sell the slogan in real life and was literally fired for it. Either way, it's probably best that he let this one stay out of his brain and on VHS. And on to episode 9. Number 24, Cherished Memories of Mr. Poopybutthole. As the center of many fan theories about alternate realities, Mr. Poopybutthole demands a lot of attention whenever he shows up on screen. But so far this season, MPB has laid low for the most part, besides proposing to Morty for a split second in the last episode. That makes sense though, since the initial joke of Mr. Poopybutthole, apart from his name, was that he was a longtime friend of the family that was never seen up to that point. The Rick and Morty production team might have wanted to dispel the idea that we've been following different Rick and Mortys in different universes from episode to episode. Previously, fans had speculated that the sudden appearance of Mr. Poopybutthole signified that his episode debut took place in a different reality than the one that we've been used to. But now, a second time this season, we see Mr. Poopybutthole, his picture hung up on the fridge. Either this is a signal that most Rick and Mortys have their own Mr. Poopybutthole, or that the animators are just fucking with us. And when it comes to the show, it could very well be both. Number 25, Brad is moving on. Whenever there's a crowd scene in Rick and Morty, you probably want to freeze frame and look around. This pays off at the restaurant scene, when who do we see but Brad, Morty's classmate and resident high school jock. Cue the blurry zoom in. Ignoring the mustache guy in the foreground, it would seem that Brad is there with the blonde woman on the right, which is interesting since he's usually with Jessica. Brad and Jessica seem to have an on-again, off-again thing going on. They broke up a bit before Rick had his run-in with his toxic self, but by the end of that episode, Brad and Jessica seem to be on the mend. They could still be taking a break, or Brad is cheating on his girlfriend at a random restaurant. One thing's for sure, Brad probably didn't look at the Yelp reviews either. Number 26, Jerry's car looks just like Jerry. Well, it used to. Jerry Smith's car has been through the ringer before, but those were other universes, I think. After this week's episode, however, it seems to be gone for good, telepathically crushed into a cube. Jerry can probably find another one of those cartoony station wagons any place, and there's reason to think that he'll go out of his way to track one down, because they look just like him. Seriously, look at Jerry's shirt. The stripes match his station wagon, down to the wood paneling. It's one of those ideas that sounds silly, but once someone suggests it, you'll never be able to see anything else. Number 27, a couple loose ends. Maybe you guys could actually help us out here, because we usually try to leave things out if we're not 100% sure, but these ones seem like there's something. When Rick is going through Beth's old childhood gadgets, among the unbreakable bats and sounder racing sneakers is a fake police badge. It's only on screen for a second, but the weird part is that it's got a badge number, VA184. We know from previous episodes that numbers in the show often mean something significant. Part of this likely relies on the fact that the people behind the show know that people are going to dissect every frame, like, we are. But we're stumped as to what VA184 is a reference to. Is it supposed to be Highway 184 in Virginia, a reference to the Veterans Association? It could very well be nothing, but it comes right before location tracking stickers. These stickers have specific location tags. The production team had to know we'd plug those into Google Maps, but when you do, you get a spot off the coast of Africa. Either that's where Atlantis sunk, or the location is completely meaningless. Personally, we're hoping that this location will come back someday, just so we didn't waste our time. Number 28, Rick's stash of old machines and munchies. Okay, time for the good stuff, real one this time. Just over a minute into the episode, Rick rummages through an old box for the magic chalk that opens up a gateway to Fruipyland. But there are a ton of callbacks inside. The box itself is a callback to the moving company that's been featured a couple times in the show. Inside, one of the most recognizable gadgets is a Meeseeks box, the corners of which you can make out pretty well. And another big one is the Vindibeacon, a large purple glowing crystal that summoned Rick and Morty to help the Vindicators early in Season 3. Next to the Vindibeacon, we can see Rick's memory wiping machine, which we just saw in the previous episode. They really planned the stuff in advance, huh? It's only visible for a few frames, but if we zoom and rotate just enough, you can see part of a box of simple Ricks, the decadent and disturbing treat from the Citadel of Ricks seen in the instant classic Rick-Lantis mix-up. When episodes are packed to the minute with details like these, it's tough to not overanalyze every frame. Number 29, Jerry's robe has a hidden meaning. Over the course of 3 seasons, Rick and Morty has gone to great lengths to convince us that Jerry is objectively pathetic. Even though things went a bit better for him in the finale, the show did get one last dig in the form of Jerry's robe. On the back, you can see the Chinese character, this thing, which literally translates to weak. Why did Jerry buy a robe like that? Knowing him, he probably saw some Chinese writing and thought it looked cool. The store attendant probably told Jerry it meant mysterious. Typical Jerry. Number 30, Rick's fear of pirates puts an early episode in a new perspective. Seems like we learn something new about Rick every episode. He doesn't so much grow as a character as he just adds to his ball of flaws and hang-ups. This week we found out one of the few things Rick is afraid of: pirates. It's a silly random gag that you kind of forget after they jump to the next scene, but let's back up a minute. Where have we seen pirates in Rick and Morty before? Back in the first season's Fantastic Voyage, Interspace, Jurassic Park spoof, Anatomy Park, Rick was hung up on an attraction called Pirates of the Pancreas. Nobody else really saw the appeal besides him, and now we know why. Because Rick is terrified of pirates, and he thinks that would make for an excellent amusement park ride. Looking at it that way, Pirates of the Pancreas would probably go great next to the Tunnel of Lasting Bonds with Loved Ones. Number 31, some very specific nods to Minecraft. The fact that Minecraft was a part of the episode does not count as a cool Easter egg or a hidden detail, no matter what the YouTube videos that are trying to pad out their watch time will tell you. Not that this video is one of them. This video it's different. It's different and good. But Rick and Morty cut a little deeper, referencing one of the most popular games in the world while they weren't actually talking about it. Remember when the army sets up their own rinky-dink portal? One of the soldiers activates it with a lighter. As it so happens, igniting a gate with a small amount of fire is exactly how you activate a portal in Minecraft. Our time in the Rick and Morty-ized Minecraft world was brief, and that's for a reason. As Rick noted, it's been done. Informative murder porn is the Minecraft-heavy South Park episode Rick is referring to here. It happened to air on October 2nd, 2013, almost 4 years before the Rick and Morty episode. Between this and Mr. Poopy Butthole's eerily accurate prediction, it's almost as though the production team knows what the hell they're doing. Number 32, another one of the show's writers makes a cameo. Rick and Morty's producers, animators, and writers seem to find a way to sneak into random episodes as background characters, and the Rick-Churian Morty date has yet another in a long line of creative cameos. The guy at the beginning of the episode mopping up the Kennedy sex tunnels appears to be Mike McMahon, one of the show's writers. Work hard, kids, and you too can eventually get killed by some kind of alien Googa. Number 33, the president borrows a gun from Half-Life. The gun that the president uses to whip Rick around the room kind of looks like the gravity gun from the Half-Life games. I could waste more time here, but that's kind of all the context you need. It's neat, it's cool, let's move on. Number 34. Mr. Poopy Butthole's picture looks familiar. Yes, it was a little disappointing to see Mr. Poopy Butthole in the after-credits stinger instead of, say, Evil Morty. But it was kind of nice to get a sneak peek into MPB's private life, now that he started a family. Peeking at his photos, it appears as though members of Mr. Poopy Butthole's species are born with those little top hats on. In addition to his wife and kid, Mr. Poopy Butthole has posted up some pictures of the Smith-Sanchez family, including one picture of him and Rick that we've seen before. The background is a bit different, but that is the same picture that can be found in Mr. Poopy Butthole's home and on Beth's fridge, as we saw in the last episode. This might be one of those things that's a result of animators reusing assets, but it's nice continuity all the same. Number 35, tons of creepy government cover-ups in the White House. If you're looking for Easter eggs and hidden references in this episode, the Rick president fight is jam-packed. There are so many little details obscured by their hectic brawl that you'll absolutely have to go frame by frame to catch everything. While the fight is going on beneath the White House, the most noticeable background gag is the moon landing set. But if you pause at just the right moment while Rick and the president are rocketing up through the floors, you can catch some disturbing stuff. For just a couple of frames, you can see what appears to be the site of a demonic ritual. And just a few frames after this, we see a skeleton between the floorboards that looks a hell of a lot like Tupac Shakur, pistol necklace and all. Backing up, you can see even more of the government's dirty laundry just a few seconds earlier. While Rick is dodging missile fire, you can see the fake moonlander. A handful of frames later, a nearby convertible goes up in flames. Looking closely at the blood spatter on the back and the flags up front, it becomes clear that this is part of the possibly staged JFK assassination. It's hard to read here, but the boxes next to the car read Jumbo Magic Bullets, a reference to the assassination conspiracy theory popularized by the Oliver Stone movie JFK. And because we've reached that point, as a nation, there's also a staged diorama of the World Trade Center towers. That one's more than a little dark and kind of ludicrous, but the last faked historical event brings it just back to plain hilarious. Yep, that is Washington crossing the Delaware, a famous moment in American history which was apparently filmed on a soundstage hundreds of years ago, and the remnants of which the US keeps in a basement under the White House. Only in Rick and Morty would you read that sentence and say, yeah, I buy it.